Death, Be Not Proud by John Donne. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings and desperate men, and dost with poison, war and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. Welcome. John Donne was a contemporary of Shakespeare. He was born in 1572 and he died in 1631 at the age of 59. He was born into a staunch Catholic family at a time when it was illegal to be a Catholic in England, where the official religion was Anglicanism. He was even related to the famous Catholic martyr, Sir Thomas More. Your choice of religion in those years in England wasn't simply a matter for theoretical debate. It was actually extremely risky. He was a very intelligent person. He attended Oxford and Cambridge, but he wasn't allowed to graduate from either of these schools because he was a Catholic. And this had serious implications in his life. Later on, he did convert to Anglicanism. This was not something that he did simply for financial experience or to gain more opportunities in his life. He was a very thoughtful man, and all his writings, his essays, his sermons, and even his poems show that he thought deeply about religion. He eventually became the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. In fact, if you had lived in England in the early 17th century, you may well have been one of those who travelled long distances to hear John Donne deliver his riveting sermons. What made his writing and his speaking so remarkable? Well, he was one of a group of poets who wrote in the early 17th century who were known as the Metaphysical Poets, or they later became known as the Metaphysical Poets. And their work was extremely intellectual. It was written for a small elite. In fact, very, very little of this was actually published at the time. I would think of it as our online facilities now. Most of it was just passed from person to person in small manuscripts, and it was much debated in these elite intellectual circles, or just simply enjoyed. Certainly, the work was a curious blend of passion and intellect, and this was noted and much enjoyed by modern poets like T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats. But what about the poem itself? Let's have a look at it. What about the poem itself? It begins much of John Donne's poetry. It begins in medias res. This is the Greek phrase for in the middle of things. And if we look at his opening, death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. We are drawn directly into an argument, aren't we, between a personification of death and the persona who speaks the poem. I am drawn to John Donne's dramatic quality. We're drawn right into this dramatic argument between the two, and right from the beginning, the persona is quite belligerent and even defiant and contemptuous, isn't it? Because he defies death, the unthinkable thing. And the rest of the poem is actually a logical argument upholding this initial standpoint. He continues to deny the fact that death is this tyrant that cannot be overthrown. And he even begins to belittle death as the argument unfolds. He says, for those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death. So death becomes someone to be pitied. Nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, so rest and sleep are portrayed in the poem as just pictures of death. But we enjoy having that nap or that sound sleep. So from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be much pleasure. We derive pleasure from it. So he argues logically, how much more pleasure will we derive then from death? And he uses the old cliche that the best men seem to die youngest. He uses that to further his argument, because his argument is that they are the ones who deserve it most. So the work of John Donne, like most metaphysical poets, is very witty. And this combination of passion and emotion and logic and a carefully constructed intellectual argument. He then belittles death further by saying that death is merely a slave that has to run about and perform the commands of fate, kings, or even desperate men. Death is on call and has to perform when it is commanded to perform. So it goes from being a welcome deliverer, the soul's delivery, to being a mere slave. And he even suggests that death is ineffectual, actually, that poppy or charms could work as well and even better than thy stroke. And the poem, which is a sonnet, an Elizabethan sonnet, falling neatly into those 3 quatrains in the rhyming couplet, builds up to its climax by challenging death further. Why swellest thou then? Why does death puff itself up then? And that couplet, one short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So death becomes simply a short, pleasurable sleep before eternal life. Death is not the end, death is merely the beginning. And he ends on a note of triumph with this paradox: death, thou shalt die. Death itself will die. So the masterstroke was the personification of death, because death is immediately diminished from the beginning of the poem, because death is mortal. And in the end, death becomes far from unconquerable. Death itself will die. I must say, I love the Metaphysical Poets. I will definitely look ahead to some of John Donne's other sonnets. He also wrote sonnets about love, which I think still are so meaningful today. If you found his poetry rather fun and meaningful and interesting, then please remember to click subscribe and visit me at my website, formuse.org.